which brings me to maybe the single most important thing I try to tell uh, new collectors when they say, what's the most important thing I should know? And I say, well, believe it or not, it's not grading, and it's not eras of comics, and it's not history. The single most important concept to embrace as a new collector is.
My special guest is Gary Carter. He is legendary. Back in the 90s, he was editor of Comic Book Marketplace. He's worked with folks like Bob Overstreet, Ernie Gerber, and helped them as they've developed the hobby of comic books. Along with Gary, I brought in my old friend Ben Labanog, and so he'll provide some color commentary as well. Gary, first question for you. What's your opinion about grading?
50 years ago, it didn't matter. People go to a comic show, buy a book, take it home, love it, read it. VG was good enough. We didn't bother to scrape staples or disassemble books or flatten them. Heck, we didn't even bother putting them in Mylar. Mylar wasn't even invented yet as a preservation material. Ernie gets a lot of credit for that, actually. It's fascinating to me that we're attempting to evaluate something with so many variables that it's extremely difficult to quantify. In the first edition of the price guide I did with Bob, I started out with an example of where I said, you take two otherwise identical copies of Superman 1 in it, and they're both approximately good to VG. And in the first copy, a 3-inch by 2-inch corner has been ripped off the back cover. And on the front cover in the lower left-hand corner, someone wrote their initials in ballpoint pen, about an inch tall. Okay. In the next copy, those defects are not there, but someone has taken a cigarette and burned out Superman's face for a total of 1/2 of a square inch. And the question is, which one of those copies do you want more than the other? Which would you rank a higher desirability?
I'll take the one with I can see his face.
Yeah, me
Correct.
too.
And so would everybody else on Earth. They would, in a second, they're going to say, well, of course I want Superman's face complete. And that ink on the lower left-hand corner of the cover is not that problematic for me. And that missing chunk out of the back cover, I don't even see it because I got a backing board in my Mylar, so I don't care. But the point I'm getting at is which one has the highest amount of damage from a square inch perspective? And the answer is the first copy. And yet the second copy is more desirable aesthetically.
We start talking eye appeal, and that's real big to collectors. And probably more so now with the CGC grading, it's like, oh, it looks good in the Mylar, which is what we used to say, versus now it looks good in the slab, but you can see the back cover and you can see that big piece out. Oh, but it's on the back cover.
Well, which brings me to maybe the single most important thing I try to tell new collectors when they say, what's the most important thing I should know? And I say, well, believe it or not, it's not grading, and it's not eras of comics, and it's not history. The single most important concept to embrace as a new collector is different defects have different aesthetic value to different collectors. And any attempt to normalize or universalize this is immediately going to be impossible. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And so the question is then, how does the grading community embrace the fact that technically everybody has a different grading standard? How do you?
It's an art science, is what you're saying.
Yeah. When I look at a coin, I don't have to open it up and look at the inside and increase the number of variables by 50. When I look at a stamp, I don't have to open it up and increase the number of variable criteria by 60, right? But when I look at a comic book, holy shit, look what I got to do. I've got to look at printing defects. I've got to look at bindery defects, distribution and handling defects, consumer defects. How bad is the defect? Where is the defect? What is the defect? Um, it's a miracle that anybody can grade anything when you think about it. There's a constant controversy over whether grading standards should change based on the age of the book. And I always argued, particularly when I was at Overstreet, that it's not the age of the book that requires a different grading standard. It's actually the manufacturer and bindery of the book that requires a different grading standard. If you look at the cover stock used on Marvels from approximately 58 to approximately 70, but maybe 68-ish, everybody goes, well, Marvel chipping, Marvel chipping, Marvel chipping. Well, has anyone ever figured out why there's Marvel chipping? Well, the answer is, instead of using normal cover stock that they use in Poughkeepsie, New York, they asked for thinner cover stock to save a little money. Okay, and when you use thinner cover stock, the broad knife and end knives on the trimming process go through levels of sharpness depending on when they were sharpened last and how long you use them without resharpening, right? And if you look at the vector on every Marvel chipping triangle, it's perfectly consistent with engineering mathematics of what happens when a knife moving in a vector of force or direction gets dulled out. Which direction does it pull? Well, it pulls these little triangles out as it moves back and forth against the side of the comic book. Same with the top, but not as bad because the broad knife is longer and gets dull faster, right? So if you think about that, you go, why aren't the grading standards for Marvels from 58 to say 65 at least? Why isn't that grading standard different? Is Marvel chipping? It's not a printer's defect, it's a bindery defect, if you think about it. Okay, so there's printing defects, bindery defects, distribution defects, such as wire dents when they bind them in wire and throw them on the ground at the newsstand. There's handling defects, so after the buyer buys it from the spinner rack, when they read it, they fold the cover around each time and bend the cover back so they can read it with one hand, right? So there's handler defects. But there's also defects inherent in the cheap paper. So certain eras of DC, certain eras of Marvel have less expensive newsprint, perhaps from Canada or overseas. You don't know what the source is, that has more acidic content, which causes the pages to accelerate their turning yellow and maybe even brown later. So no one has ever researched from company to company, from year to year, what the actual raw material components are of comic books. And if one wanted to really get into the granular level of grading, you can't explore the unknown without making a map of what's known first. You don't explore the unknown continent till you first make a map of what's known. Well, I want you to think about the fact that we're still in nursery school as comic book. Like, we think we're so sophisticated. We think we're so advanced. Oh, we've got slabbing and all these grading experts and everything. We haven't even made a map of what has gone before on a company by company, title by title basis in terms of who did the binding, where did the paper come from, how thick is the cover stock, how thick is the interior stock, is it coded versus uncoated, is it black and white versus color, because the chemical components of color printing on newsprint may in some cases accelerate the acidic decomposition of the page. lest we forget, I hope everybody remembers this. These things were meant to be read once or twice and tossed in the round file. They were never meant to be saved. They were never meant to be preserved. The very nature of newsprint itself is cheap, disposable, throwaway. That's what it is. It's like if someone gave you a jar of battery acid with a piece of paper in it and said, "Here's your new collectible. Wonder how long it's going to last." Well, we don't know because CGC doesn't take its little acid tester and put it on the page of every comic and say, "Oh, look, pH of this one is way low. It's going to be brittle overnight here if we're not careful." Or, "Oh, look, 7.0 on this paper. It's going to last forever." Right? And is it different for cover stock versus interior stock? I'm 75 now, and I've been involved with comic books one way or another since I was 7 years old. Actually, even a little sooner than that, now that I'm thinking about it. But buying them, I started when I was 7. And when I think of how much I thought I knew over the years, how much we think we know, but we are still in kindergarten. For instance, if I was a comic book collector, the first thing I would do is I would go visit my local bindery and I would learn about trim versus untrim, coated stock versus uncoated stock, cover stock versus interior stock, and the weight of paper, newsprint and why it's so fragile and why it's so cheap, web press versus sheet fed press. There's just so many variables when you go to the printer and the bindery. And all that you do, I know that for myself, when I first started doing that research back in the 80s, I would come away every day and I would go, "Oh my God, that explains that. Oh my God, now I understand it. Oh my God, I see why that happens so often now. Oh, I understand that. I get it. I get it." It was like going from high school to college in terms of your level of understanding of what I would call the fallacy of accurate grading. It's easy to grade VF or better. It's easy to grade poors and fairs, right? But if you talk to any seasoned grader, they'll tell you the real challenge is goods, VGs, and fines, and where the line of demarcation is between them. And I've been on a crusade all my life. I hate combination grades. I hate any grade which doesn't say you're either VF plus or near mint minus. Which is it? I don't agree that there's such a grade. Is just because someone defines it. VF-NM was invented by dealers so that they could put a near mint on a VF book. In my opinion. Now, I know that I'm in the minority. I know a whole lot of people out there just love their combination grades. I cannot tell you how many books I see good to VG. I'm not sure I know what that means, but I do see a lot of people who use I call it a scapegoat grade. I really don't know whether it's good or very good. So I'm going to pick good to very good and play it safe. And I get to put VG on a good book.
Yeah, it's the mental game. You go, "Oh, I'm close to VG, but I'm better than a good."
Well, remember I talked about wishful thinking? Yeah. To me, the ultimate expression of comic book wishful thinking is combination grades. But I'm not going to go off on that. I've had arguments with people since, God, let me think. First argument over that was with my brother in 1968. Because he liked combo grades and I didn't, but that was kind of the way it was. And then when the grading standards started happening, we started working on the first grading guide rather. I argued till I was blue in the face with everybody, but the problem is that the grading standard was dominated by dealers, not collectors.
Hey y'all, couple quick things. If you enjoyed Gary's story, please give this video a like and provide some comments from Gary. He is going to watch this video and likely will look at the comments. And number 2, Gary mentioned that he's been involved with comic books since 1956. You won't believe what his first purchase was off the rack. It's incredible, and that's going to be the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around real soon.